Hello, everyone. This is Boom.
And I'm Spice, and this is the second edition of Boom and Spice Poetry Potluck. The show where we bring poetry to each other's attention out of the blue, like a secret Santa situation, and we discuss them live in our podcast recorded. It was live at one point. It's not
Yeah.
it's not currently live, but it was live for a time. Yeah, you'll be
This is
recording
the live reactions.
exactly snap reactions. There we go. And the poem I chose this week is a very popular poem, and despite the fact that I'm not religious, it involves some religious iconography that really plays into some recent events. And we discussed for a time having a discussion on literature in a post-COVID world, which still might be a discussion that comes about in the podcast at some point. But this is the poem I was going to have it revolve around. And this is where I got the idea for discussing that. And on that note, here is The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, better known as W.B. Yeats. And I quote, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image of a spiritus mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born." So, that is The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. What do you think about it?
All right. Yeah, I like that. A lot more, a lot more intense than
It's quite a tonal
episode.
shift, right?
Devin goes from
Smokey the Bear setting fires to W.B. Yeats calling for the impending apocalypse.
Okay, but yeah, I do like that, especially like you were saying, with us thinking about starting that discussion about literature and this post-COVID world here. That's kind of, I like that. That's a good one to bring in.
And it feels like it's the sort of thing that everyone can cite no matter what time. Like, do you ever notice in media, it feels like every year they're like, we're as divided as we've ever been. Every single year. And that's how this feels. It feels like everyone feels like the beast is on its way to Bethlehem every year. Like, whether it be the Mayan apocalypse thing,
Yeah,
or
we're never safe.
Yeah, like Ferguson, or that time we thought a meteor was going to hit us, or like climate change, which is a very reasonable thing to be afraid of, and it's very. I love the imagery. There's something about the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Like, I am a tentative fan of Nietzsche. As a man, we don't see eye to eye, but there's a lot of philosophical things he touches on that are very interesting. And there's a quote of his that gets misconstrued quite a bit, where he goes, "God is dead, and we have killed him." He did not say that. It was a character in a book, a madman raving about the town. And while that may be a self-insert character of a sort, because, I mean, he was an atheist, but it wasn't meant to be a declarative statement
That we
like,
have
killed him.
God.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not like they put a sniper up there and shot God.
Yeah.
It's a statement of philosophy in terms of intellectually we have killed God. And then he moves on and says, like, what do we do about nihilism, the impending nihilism? And while he himself was not a nihilist, he thought we were going to plunge into an age of it, which, I mean, he was pretty right about, considering, I mean, the religiousness of the Nazis was kind of up in the air. Like, they did have God's with us on their belts, but it's really, it's a complicated subject. But in terms of not being able to hear the falconer, that is very reminiscent of God is dead and we have killed him. Mm-hmm. Where,
absolutely,
yeah, and the center cannot hold. The whole things fall apart thing. There's so many lines that can be taken and like chewed on for such a long period of time. Like, I'm not sure if anyone who's listening to this podcast is familiar with it, but this is a book that we will certainly cover in the future. I have no doubt about it. It's Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. And a part of why he decided to go with that title was he wanted to mix the influences of his continent and the colonizers of his continent. But also it describes the chaos that ensues once the colonizers arrive and the main character is forced to adapt or die, essentially. And it's it's a subtle way of describing chaos that rattles me to my core in terms of things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Like a tornado, like life is a tornado, and suddenly the gusts stop and we have to pick up the pieces. You know, the house has fallen on the witch in this case. Mm-hmm. And it really, it's honestly riveting. My blood's pumping just having read it. So that's The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats.
All right, nice. I like the diversity here.
Exactly. It's a potluck. Sometimes
it's a potluck. You don't know what you're gonna get.
Buffalo chicken dip. Sometimes you get the apocalypse.
All right. Well, mine's probably gonna tone it down a little bit here. I've got "Have You Earned Your Tomorrow" by Edgar Guest. Is anybody happier because you passed his way? Does anyone remember you spoke to him today? The day is almost over, and its toiling time is through. Is there anyone to utter now a kindly word of you? Did you give a cheerful greeting to a friend who came along, or a churlish short of howdy, and then vanish in the throng? Were you selfish, pure, and simple as you rushed along the way, or is someone mighty grateful for a deed you did today? Can you say tonight, in parting with the day that's slipping fast, that you helped a single brother of the many you had passed? Is a single heart rejoicing over what you did or said? Does a man whose hopes were fading now with courage look ahead? Did you waste the day or lose it as well? Was it well or sorely spent? Did you leave a trail of kindness or a scar of discontent? As you close your eyes in slumber, do you think that God would say, "You have earned one more tomorrow by the work you did today"?
I think there's two very interesting conclusions that I've come to based on this poem. One, I think it's telling that this is the first poem we've read thus far before that rhymes. And I think it's a misconception that some people have that poetry needs to rhyme or that good poetry needs to rhyme. And I'm glad that we're taking a step to dispel that.
Certainly.
But what's even more interesting is I'd say neither of us are the most religious people. I'm not sure exactly.
No, not at all.
Yeah, exactly. But we both chose poems with religious iconography or religious tones. And I think that's also interesting. That's our culture has been shaped so much by religion that two relatively secular people picking art for a podcast decided to go with religious iconography both times. And I think that's telling. I'm not sure exactly of what. Granted, we are from America, which is generally more Christian than most places. I would not go so far as to say a Christian nation due to our secular roots, but majority Christian populace. And I think it's interesting that that's influenced our choices so early in this. On top of that, I find our choices of poems very funny, because you've chosen two authors who are a little more obscure. Like, I've never heard of them, and I read a
Yeah.
bit of poetry. Meanwhile, my two authors, Billy Collins, one of the most popular contemporary authors of our day, and then W.B. Yeats, one of the most popular authors ever. And I think that's an interesting dichotomy in itself.
Yeah, I'm really liking what this series is bringing so far. A lot of surprising ideas. I like what you're talking about with the Christianity in both of ours this week, and I think it speaks to kind of what you were saying there is just because a poem or any idea has Christianity as a driving factor, or like what this one, I guess, what Edgar Guest was saying is like godly manner,
Yeah.
being kind as a godly trait or a holy way to live. Just because that's what maybe the author was saying or what you could take it as, doesn't mean that's the only way you have to take it to think it's a fair poem. And I think it's good that we can both look at poetry beyond just the face value. See, because some people, I can imagine, if they see a religious poem, would almost steer clear.
Yeah.
Like, this is, and I think when you do that, you can miss the greater meaning.
Absolutely. If we have any budding neckbeard atheists on our viewership roll, I used to be a very like almost rude atheist, because I felt cheated by having been misled for so long, seemingly. And I've learned recently, because I did choir for a long time, a lot of choral music, because of what I read and what I listen to, that if you try to discount religious art, you are going to do a great disservice to yourself. And whether it be, last night at work, I'm working like 12-hour shifts at a motel overnight, so I have to think of unique ways to pass the time. And I sat there listening to a piece that I sang with my choir in a cathedral downtown Cleveland, and we did Fauré's Requiem, which, if you're not familiar, a requiem is a tribute to the dead, essentially, and it's very religious, but it's also incredibly catchy, and it's also kind of eerie in places, and it's a very fun piece to listen to, with a lot of dynamic contrast. And if you just take the religious element and that's all you fixate on, you are going to isolate yourself from potentially the majority of great art that has ever been produced. That is the sheer magnitude of religion and art. So while our poems can be read and the religious element can be taken out, you could take the beast approaching Bethlehem as a symbol and nothing more, and you can use God at the end of his poem as nothing more than a symbol. It doesn't change the fact that if you turn yourself away from religious art at face value, you are going to do yourself a disservice. The sum of art is significantly less once you start picking out the ones that have religious themes. Weird tangent, I know. That's what.
No, it's necessary.
Yeah, that's
necessary.
That's what you get on the Poetry Potluck. There's weird tangents you go down, because I've never read that poem. I've never even heard of Edgar Guest.
Edgar Guest.
I've never heard of him, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this, all 12 of you at this point, have heard of W.B. Yeats, but you might not have heard that poem, or you might have heard some of the lines from that poem, but never heard of W.B. Yeats. And I think it's important that you, I think there's a lot of interesting themes in both of these. Apply Boom's poem to your life, and apply W.B. Yeats to the way you think about the world. And in that way, I think you'll be a more complete person. And that's some Boom and Spice book advice. And on that note,
Absolutely.
would you recommend The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats to someone else?
I would. I definitely would. And I think a lot of it has to go with what you went into today. Our whole Christianity tangent there. Just not closing yourself off to new experience and new art just because it's not secular in nature.
Absolutely.
Would you recommend Have You Earned Your Tomorrow by Edgar Guest?
Absolutely. Because I think it's a unique way of thinking of the whole pay it forward mentality, where it's not just like I was at a Barnes and Noble once, and I held a door open for a man. And there's a second door, because you know how they do the double doors things to try and keep in air conditioning and stuff. And he holds the door open for me. I say thank you. And he goes, one kind turn deserves another. And I think that's a very similar approach to it. I think that goes to show that that idea can be expressed in a lot of different ways. But the innermost, golden rule part of it, it being treat others how you'd like to be treated, treat others how they want to be treated, the platinum rule. I feel like those are things to live by, and this poem's just another way of spinning it, and I think it's a useful way.
Yep. This one, it stuck out to me. I forget where I was. It was sometime during high school. I read it was a graduation speech. I can't remember who was giving it, but I was watching it, and the quote that I pulled from it, or that I'm sure everyone who watched it did, was this guy was relatively old, and he was talking to these new-faced kids about to go into the world, and he was telling them what he regrets most in his life isn't the promotion he missed or the opportunity he didn't take. The one thing that he really regrets as he gets into his older years is his lapses in kindness. The opportunities he had to help somebody or to make someone else's life better and didn't take it. And that, to high school Boom, was powerful.
That to college Spice is powerful. I think that's a very interesting way of thinking about life. And on that note, on that powerful note, I've been Spice.
And I'm Boom.
And this has been Boom and Spice Book Advice. You've been advised.